Thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. From websites and online stores, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence. Hello friends, I hope that you've been well. In today's video, I am going to be revisiting my princess character Buttercup and my knight character Aster once again in an illustration, but I am also going to be tackling a art style that I have dabbled in before, but I guess I wouldn't say is my typical or default art style, which is this like very inspired by retro shoujo manga that you can see here in a previous illustration. And if you've been with me for a while, you've seen this knight and princess character together before, and you've also seen me tackle knight and princess themes many times before. And so I thought, let's mash up the knight and princess with this retro shoujo style. And so I obviously looked to Pinterest for inspiration for various things. One being I looked up female knight, and so you can see it shows up lots of different reference photos for armor. And then of course I also wanted to look up references to get inspired for the dress design for my princess character. And then I also wanted to look up retro shoujo manga as well, which just brought me to a little Google search. And I noticed that a lot of these I think are from the 70s, the ones that have this style with like the huge doll-like eyes and big lashes. So that was where my main inspiration for the art style specifically came from. And so with all of those kind of in my mind, I did a really quick thumbnail on like just regular paper in my sketchbook. And then I took a photo of that sketch and brought it into Procreate on my iPad and basically just started doing a more finished, fleshed out sketch on top. And I did kind of play around with different poses, particularly for the knight character. I wasn't really sure if I wanted her to look a little bit more stoic or if I wanted her to look super affectionate and have her like kind of leaning in to the princess character. But I came across this image and this is what really started the inspiration for the initial kind of posing. And I just loved how the character on the right had been posed in such a like a wistful way, in the way that her kind of head is tilted up and then the hair is kind of windswept. And so that's really what launched the kind of initial stage of this. And then of course I decided to build the posing further out so that it wasn't just their faces. And yeah, I wanted to have that very romantic, but also feel like it's a cover art of some sort. And so that's why they're kind of posed in a way where they're mostly kind of facing the viewer. But I also, I don't know, there was something that I liked about having the knight face away, kind of as if she's kind of protecting or overlooking the surroundings, and also leads the eye to kind of the rest of the image. And as you can see, I'm putting in the details of the clothing. I have been obsessed with bows lately, and so I also knew that going into this illustration, being inspired by the retro manga, the rendering is pretty minimal. A lot of the times it's quite flat in the colors, and so I really wanted to play around with adding more details so that the image didn't feel empty because of it being rendered more flat. And so I just kind of went to town, particularly on the princess character's outfit in terms of adding a lot of detail and things to her hair. And I have come to a place where with armor, I know that it's never quite logistically correct, but since I'm not a character concept artist and I just am just drawing characters for more or less aesthetic purposes, I'm fine with the armor not necessarily entirely making sense. Here, I'm just adding in very light washes of shading and color to get a sense of what it'll look like in the actual traditional sense. And then for the background, I took inspiration from the previous image that I showed, as well as this retro cover as well, which features a lot of large floral pieces. And originally I thought I was going to go with a pastel or bright colored background like the illustration that I was referencing from, but I decided to go with a dark one so that the characters and florals really stood out. And then after I was finished with that, I printed it out onto just regular copy paper so that I could transfer it onto my watercolor paper, and I use a light pad to do so. And basically I just tape the back of the sketch, the digital sketch, onto the watercolor paper very lightly with some masking tape just so that it stays in place. And then I go ahead and actually trace my sketch onto the watercolor paper. And I do this off camera because it's really hard to see with all of my studio lights on. I use my Faber-Castell polychromos pencils. They are oil-based, so when you use watercolors on top, they do not budge. This is what the sketch looks like after the fact. I kind of switch between the two colors because some elements are cool and some elements are warm, just in case the pencils kind of rub off a little bit into when I'm actually painting. And then I use a really wide masking tape to tape the watercolor paper down to a masonite board. But before we start painting, I just want to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Squarespace. When you are an artist who's been on the internet for a really long time, you find that your Instagram feed is not always necessarily exactly the highlights of what you have to offer. And so I really like that on my Squarespace website, I can have several different pages dedicated to specific types of work that I have and only show the highlights, or at least in my opinion, my favorites. And so this one here is all of my sketchbook favorites. And then you can also have an online shop, and that's where I host my Patreon secret shop where I sell the leftover rewards. So if you're interested in launching your own website, head over to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/imawonder for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. And now back to our actual illustration here. So I have been working on a very exciting project that some of you probably already know about, which is I'm creating my own custom paintbrushes with Craftimo. And these are the kind of final design of the paintbrushes that I'm working with here. I'm very excited about them. We don't have a specific date for when they're launching just yet, but I do have a link in the description for the landing page where you can sign up to get notified as soon as they drop. And I will definitely be keeping everyone updated on more details in the future. But the illustration that we're working on in today's video is actually going to be the package art for the box that the paintbrushes will come in. And so I thought that it would be the perfect kind of, two birds with one stone of not only showing you the performance of these paintbrushes with multimedia, but also actually work on the package design for the box of these paintbrushes as well. And so a lot of the times I actually have been doing line art last in my process, but for today's video, because of the inspiration, I thought that maybe it might make more sense to actually start out with the line art first. And so I'm using acrylic inks. I'm pretty much just at this moment switching between two colors, a magenta for all of the warm elements and then a dark blue for the cooler elements. And I'm using the smallest paintbrush that comes in my paintbrush set, which is a 3/0, and it's super tiny, really sharp, and it's perfect for line art and super small details. For my patrons, they know that in the first round of samples that I got, the brushes, I made them initially a lot longer. So it was originally more of like a rigger brush technically, thinking that, if it's longer bristles, it'll be able to hold more paint. Thus, I don't have to dip my brush into paint as often. But I found that for me personally, the way that I work, I found that a rigger was much harder to control when the bristles were much longer. And as you know, I really like having precision. And so I switched the length to be a little shorter. So now it's technically a round as opposed to a rigger, which is fine. And then getting into the actual painting of this piece, I pulled out a whole bunch of watercolors. I don't even come close to using all of these tubes, but I just find that it's easier just to pull out what I think I'll need based off of the color composition that I made digitally on Procreate. And then you'll see throughout the illustration that not only do I swatch the colors on like a scrap piece of paper as I go, just so I know what the colors are going to look like, but I also have just like this container or bottle that I keep adding to the paints, and it's literally just tap water in a plastic bottle. I just find that is the most convenient way for me to dilute the watercolor paints. And yeah, for the process of this, I start out kind of with a lot of the warm colors first. And typically when I paint, or really do any illustration, I often use the skin tone. I usually do the skin tones first and then kind of move around the piece. But since I had already mixed pinks and light peaches, I thought that I would just sort of work in color order to start, if that makes sense. And a lot of the techniques that I use here, especially on these flowers, is that I wet the paper just with water first, and then I drop the paint in, and then it just creates this like really soft blooming effect, which I really enjoy. And you can see that I do the same with the princess's skin tone as well. I already on my palette have like this magenta mixed up, and then I also have the base skin tone mixed up, and wet the paper first and then just alternate between those two colors to get a more seamless blend of colors and gradations. Anyway, so that's something that I really wanted to focus on with this illustration, because like I was mentioning earlier, the shoujo art style is not a ton of really intensive shading or rendering. It's quite soft, and obviously there's variations from artist to artist, but the style that I was really trying to emulate was very minimal shading, but I obviously didn't want it to be entirely flat. So I really wanted to focus on just these really soft gradients, especially on the skin, to give it that very romantic, warm, inviting feeling, and also with just like very minimal shading here and there to give the characters a little bit of life, a little bit of dimension and interest. And for those of you who are followers of mine and have been with me for a while, you're probably surprised that I decided to go with these two characters for my package design as opposed to my girl gang character Momo, which is this character here, since that's a character that I've illustrated multiple times and is like my current icon for my social media. And so she's kind of been like largely associated with my brand. And she definitely was the first character that came to mind when it came to what I wanted on the package of this brush set. But when I looked at the actual brush handle design that I had chose, which is a pastel pink with that little touch of blue as well as the rose gold, to me it felt there's something like very whimsical, romantic, and very soft and elegant about them. And so when I was thinking about that kind of description, it actually felt a lot more fitting for the knight and princess character, since of course their character designs are the exact colors of this paintbrush. And honestly, even from like a slight marketing standpoint, when I was looking at the other previous collaborations on the Craftimo paintbrush sets, while there's a lot of really amazing variety in designs for the boxes and the paintbrushes, I had noticed that anyone who was drawing portraits, people, characters, it was usually only one person, in the box design, and so I thought, how do I set myself apart? And so I decided, why not have multiple characters in this package lineup? So that was another factor that kind of led me to decide to draw these two characters together for the packaging design. And I'm glad that I decided to go in this route, because I think that the paintbrushes as well as these two characters really suit each other aesthetically. And then another really great example of the wet on wet technique is the armor here. So I had completely wet the paper first just with a clean paintbrush, and then now I'm going in with multiple different shades of pinks and blues, and you can see that they all just very like softly bleed into each other, and it creates some really, really beautiful gradients and variations in colors. And yeah, you might be thinking like, why would you add pink to the armor? And for me, part of it is visual interest, and I just think that adding the pink into the armor really helps tie the colors together. You can kind of see that for the most part, I try to make the knight's character design quite cool tone, and then the princess character design very warm tone, but I still want them to be harmonious with each other. And so with the knight character, we have the same pink that's being used on the princess's hair, being used on the knight's face, as well as the armor and the flowers. And that helps just sort of make it all feel very harmonious with each other. And then the same for the princess's dress. Again, the shading, I wanted it to be very minimal, but I went in with pinks and the light blue that I used for the knight's hair for the shading, just to give it a little bit of depth, and also just so that the pink and yellow didn't feel too out of place, I guess. And then for the flowers here, I used peonies as my reference point. And of course, peony flowers, and any flower really, is typically got green leaves and stems. But since that this illustration had no green in it at all, I felt like the green really would have just not felt harmonious with the rest of this illustration. And I find that when you keep your color palette to a handful of colors, it just looks more cohesive. And so I decided to make the leaves blue instead. And then with the background here, I actually am using acrylic gouache because I wanted it to be super flat and very matte. And you can see that for the detailed areas, I used the round brush. And then for these wider areas, I was able to use the filbert, which obviously is much faster, and you get that really flat application. It's very satisfying. I did actually have to do two layers, I guess, of the acrylic gouache for the background, just so that it was really even. And then I'm going in with a second pass on the armor here to give it a little bit more dimension. And that was really important for me when I was working on this custom paintbrush set, is because I'm the type of artist who uses multitudes of paint media. And so I really wanted to show you guys that they are very versatile and truly mixed media. So in this illustration, we've now used acrylic ink, watercolors, and acrylic gouache. So I'm really pleased with how these paintbrushes perform using all three media. Of course, that being said, they would definitely work for regular gouache as well. And then, yeah, you can see here, I'm kind of taking that principle again, and I'm now introducing these Finetec gold inks. These are dry cakes that you just add water to, and then you can activate them. And I find that these have continued to be my favorite inks, because I find that with liquid metallic inks, you have to shake them really often so that the pigment is being suspended in the binder, because it often settles to the bottom. Whereas these Finetec gold inks, they just need to be, you know, saturated with a little bit of water, and then you're good to go. So and also they're quite opaque as well. And I've had them for many, many years, and they perform exactly the same every single time. So consistent. Very, very pleased with them. Highly recommend. And I also love this really soft, like champagne gold that I've been really enjoying for pearls, just so that it has a bit of a difference from the warm gold, but also allows the princess character to have some kind of metallic elements. And then I'm going in with some more acrylic gouache to add some little buttercup and aster flowers throughout to, you know, tie it into the characters' names and also just have more details. And I ended up actually going in with an acrylic paint marker for the aster flowers because it was the perfect color and also so opaque and a lot faster to do, honestly. Today's illustration is very multimedia. And then I actually wanted to deepen the line art because some of it got covered up and also just wanted it to be punchier. So I mixed the magenta and the blue to create a deeper purple, and I just went in not on everything, but areas that I really wanted the line art to be high contrast, mainly the faces. And yeah, I absolutely love working in this shoujo manga art style. It's mostly just in the eyes. The rest of the illustration is very on par with my usual art style, but there's just something extra magical about these very stylized, big, gigantic eyes. And the reason why I decided to go with this art style for the packaging of my paintbrushes is because I know that this box that holds these paintbrushes are not going to hold my paintbrushes after I start using the paintbrush. You know what I mean? Like with my paintbrushes, they always sit in like a jar or just like on my table, like out in the open so that they're ready to be used. But I also am a sucker for really nice packaging and repurposing packaging for other things. And when I was thinking about what kind of artwork would I want on a little box that I could reuse for, I don't know, jewelry or to hold other little trinkets and knickknacks. And so unsurprisingly, I am very much into ultra feminine aesthetics for my decor and home items. So that was why I decided to go with this art style and the type of illustration that we have here, in hopes that for those of you who decide to get this brush set, that you will also really enjoy this art style for your box, whether you actually genuinely continue to use it for the brushes or you repurpose it for something else, like I inevitably will as well. And with the conclusion of the illustration here, I also want to mention that over on my Patreon page, I actually have exclusive videos where I go more in depth on reviewing the previous sample of the paintbrushes and just going into detail of comparing the first sample and the second sample. And if you're a fan of these characters, this month, if you sign up, you have until the 30th to get the princess character as a print and a sticker. The knight was the previous month, but I'll list that in the Patreon secret shop in the future if you want to have the full set. But if you don't want to join Patreon, but you are interested in my work, I am finally opening up my shop again. I'll have the link in the description. I know it's literally been over a year, I think, since I've had it open. And I'm happy to announce that you can actually purchase merch from me once again. So link in the description. Thank you so much. Obviously no pressure, but whether it's Patreon, interacting with my content, my shop, if you get the brushes, whichever it'll be, thank you so much. I appreciate you. And I hope you have an amazing day or evening wherever you're at, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.